Stay away.
He was a witch, not a witch.
I can hear his smile.
I am become death. Tales Under a Broken Sky, Episode 34, Malevolency. There are places in every town where you just don't go. You know the places I'm talking about, don't you? They reside on the fringes of everything, just far enough away to exist as nothing more than a fleeting thought in people's peripheral vision, yet just close enough to provide a constant reminder of what lies on the margins of society. Sometimes, these places are visibly dangerous, old and condemned, with rotting walls and corroded supports, like that old warehouse and sawmill down by the quay. A death trap, even if nothing collapses on you. Every surface is a breeding ground for the types of noxious infections that fester in the quiet, dark corners of the world. But sometimes, they are not the places you would expect. Sometimes, they are the places that once summoned tourists in droves for scenic pictures to grace their Instagram feeds. Places that, over the course of years, have had their names and reputations sullied beyond repair, beyond redemption. Some of these places look the part, of course, but others, when only glimpsed in passing from afar, still maintain the gloss and appeal of their heyday. And with these places, it is only when you try and approach them that the feelings of danger and wrongness begin to manifest. St. Matthew's Church of the Eternal Redemption is one of those places. I first heard about St. Matthew's from a follower, commenting on a blog post I wrote about abandoned graveyards. I didn't think much of it at first. I get suggestions from followers all the time, and few and far are ever as interesting as they are made to sound. Everyone wants their little bit of time in the spotlight, and I learned early on that investing time and effort into every abandoned building is a fruitless task. Not everywhere has a story, no matter how much people want to believe otherwise. But in the weeks and months that followed, that same follower, Trollboot71, continued to comment despite my silent indifference. They progressed from just mentioning the church to posting pictures, newspaper clippings, and excerpts from an old book a local writer had published about the building. I eventually caved and looked deeper into the location, if only so I could find a reason to finally dismiss their repeated suggestions. But the more time I spent researching St. Matthew's, the more intrigued I became by the place. It wasn't just the stories, and there were plenty of them, often buried in obscure message boards and group chats for urban explorers. But rather, it was the lack of general information pertaining to the church. There was no year of construction on record, no details on when it was abandoned, which seems to have been before living memory. No plans to demolish, renovate, or repurpose. Even my calls to the diocese office were met with a casual indifference that seemed to stem more from ignorance than lack of interest. It was almost as if they were embarrassed at their lack of knowledge on the subject. Their numerous promises of callbacks, once they got in touch with people more familiar with the church, fell flat as well. I responded to Trollboot71, asking for more information, but despite their enthusiastic recommendations and incessant commenting, my responses went unanswered. But my curiosity was piqued. It is rare for large and seemingly important landmarks to fly under the radar nowadays, and I couldn't help but wonder why St. Matthew's didn't appear in more mainstream media outlets. It had all the ingredients to be one of those viral historical sites, but not once did I ever see more than a passing mention of the place. And that was what got me in the end, the novelty of it all. In the era of social media, there is so little novelty left in the world. One creator posts something about somewhere, and suddenly there are hundreds, if not thousands of others, flocking to try and capture some of that engagement before interest fades again. But here was somewhere that had flown under the radar, something new and ripe for the taking. I never stopped to ask why. I never considered if I should. And that was my mistake. Some things are best left buried in the past. Quaint and picturesque, St. Matthew's has lorded over the town below for as far back as the town records stretch. And when I say lorded over, I mean it in every sense of the word. The church dominates the town to the extent that it appears as if every street leads towards those massive doors and sharply pointed steeples, which in and of itself should probably not be that surprising. From an urban planning perspective, and given how entrenched religion is in the town's consciousness, the streets and roads were probably constructed with this exact effect in mind. But there is also something intangibly overbearing about the way it looms over the town. There is a weight to its shadow that extends far beyond the penumbra, a heaviness to the atmosphere of the town that defies explanation. Its action is insidious. It latches onto you before you realize it, pressing down on your shoulders, sinking into your gut, and gnawing at your resolve. I barely noticed that change in the atmosphere at first. It was just a subtle weight in my gut as I approached the town. But the closer I got to that accursed building, the more that feeling intensified, until only a deep, suffocating dread was left. How people live in that town is beyond me. Perhaps one gets used to the feeling over time, and it just fades into the background. Just another load to bear through the day. Just another stressor to sit alongside work, money, family and school. Or perhaps it's just willful ignorance. The stubborn refusal to acknowledge that something is rotten in the core of their home. I'm not afraid to admit that it almost broke me. In fact, I wish that it had. I'm not too proud to admit that. It was hubris that kept me there that first night. This wasn't the first time I had been somewhere that made me uneasy, and I had been in places that were far more directly and potentially dangerous than an old church. But after what I witnessed in St. Matthew's, after everything that happened, every ounce of pride and ego has been stripped from me. The scars that I bear, the ones that you can see anyway, are only the tip of the iceberg. When I fled that place, it felt like my soul had been flayed. Every single piece of who I was stripped bare, exposed, and found wanting. St. Matthew's was every bit as imposing up close as it was when first seen from the outskirts of the town. Sometimes, being close to a place can strip it of its menace. It's as if you've slipped inside the illusion and can see the space for what it really is. Old, abandoned, and impotent, but not the church of the eternal redemption. No, maybe it was because there was no illusion to break. St. Matthew's was what it was, plain and simple. It just was. Nothing grew around the grounds, at least not for long. Bare tangles of briars and brambles choked the steps that led up towards the entrance. The lawns were withered expanses of matted grass and weeds, grey and faded in the winter sun. Nothing was alive in that place. Life, as life does, had reached and reached, but was eventually and inevitably snuffed out. There was no room here for anything but the church and its creeping malevolence. I'd come prepared to break in. Almost everywhere I visited was protected from the outside world to some extent. Barred gates, chains, padlocks, man-made barriers erected to keep the living out and the darkness in. But not St. Matthew's. As I reached the top of the steps leading to the main door, I was surprised to see that the massive oak doors, still in surprisingly good condition and hanging on solid, unbroken hinges, stood ajar. In almost any other situation, I would have been relieved by the convenience of it, but not here. Not when the darkness beyond the doors seemed to be waiting for me, goading me on rather than inviting me in, daring me to enter and see what lay inside for myself. You've seen what I do. It might look reckless at times, but nothing could be further from the truth. I plan my excursions down to the smallest detail. I have itineraries, support teams, emergency services on speed dial. I leave nothing to chance. Until that day. I had no plans, There was no itinerary, no order of business. I hadn't contacted any locals for support. No one knew I was there. That alone should have been enough to drive me away from the attendant jaws of the entrance. It was so unlike me to be so unprepared, and even saying it now feels like I'm talking about a dream, full of missing details and blurred lines. It didn't dawn on me, not once, to prepare for that trip like any other. I just decided to go, and so I went, and that was it. So I hope you can understand that when I stood there on the cusp of entering, I wasn't thinking rationally. I'm not sure that I was thinking at all. To this day, I can't explain it any better than that. I didn't feel any malignant forces pressuring me into proceeding. There was no siren call that I could detect. I wasn't driven there by fear or ego. Whatever brought me there was so subtle, so insidious, that I didn't recognize it for what it was until I stepped through those doors. And by then, it was too late. I wish I could tell you more about the interior of St. Matthew's. I wish what I had to tell you made sense. But the moment I stepped across that threshold, everything that I thought I knew about the world ceased to matter. Stepping through the doors was like experiencing two realities simultaneously. I was both, and all at once, in the church as it was at that moment, all dust, rot and mould. And as it had been, polished pews, stained glass, and soft light. The effect was disorientating, and I staggered back into the doors as the two visions jostled for primacy before my eyes. The past and the present blended and diverged, overlapping each other in a kaleidoscope of disjointed timelines. Closing my eyes to the shifting universe, I groped for the handles, my fingers questing desperately along the polished wood. But there was nothing. Where just moments before, there had been a gap wide enough for me to fit through, now, there was nothing but a smooth expanse of wood. I braced myself for the rush of vertigo and opened my eyes, desperate to find something, anything, to help ground me in reality again. But I recoiled as the doors flickered between old rotten wood and the amber glow of varnish. But regardless of appearance, there was no longer a visible way out. No keyholes, no latches, no handles. I fell to my knees, retching violently as the wave of vertigo plunged into my gut, spewing the contents of my stomach across the flagstones. I knelt there panting, staring helplessly at my regurgitated lunch, as reality continued its pendulous swing between the past and the present. My pulse pounded an erratic rhythm in my temples, ebbing and flowing as my blood pressure spiraled widely in my increasing panic. Black spots floated before my eyes, and I found myself dipping closer and closer to the pool of vomit at my knees. I forced myself back, jarring my shoulders as my arms arrested my fall. I cursed the sudden jolt of pain, but continued to shuffle awkwardly away from the doors and further up the nave. My anxiety babbled in my ear, a frantic barrage of curses and exclamations that blended together into an incoherent stream of gibberish. No, what's happened, where am I, what is it, no one knows, fuck, shit, fuck, I can't do, what can I do, where, what, fuck, fuck, Christ, I need, what am I, where am I, what now, what can I do, fuck, shit, fuck, I can't, fuck, no, stupid, you were stupid, dumb, fuck, stupid, fuck. My downward spiral was haunted as I caught sight of the mural painted behind the altar. I knew St. Matthew's had been Catholic, so it was no surprise that an image of the crucifixion adorned the wall behind the altar. And it was pretty standard fare, even as the painting flickered between the bright, vibrant colours of the past and the faded, cracked paint of the present. Jesus, obviously, nailed to the cross, a spear in the bottom corner, the corresponding wound in the dead prophet's side, a woman kneeling in the foreground, head bent in prayer. Nothing you wouldn't expect to see, except as I watched, his wounds began to visibly weep, blood flowing from the holes in his hands and feet, and the stab wound in his chest. I watched in horror as the painting's face contorted in pain, and a silent scream vibrated through my body, igniting a roaring furnace in my brain. The surface of the wall rippled, and a visible wave of heat ran through the mural. The wall shimmered for a moment, and flames began to lick at the edges, chewing their way through the painting like a match to a sheet of paper. But instead of turning to ash as the flames passed, the painting peeled back to reveal another image underneath, the skin, on Jesus' chest melted to reveal a flayed torso, blood weeping from ravaged muscles. The fire travelled along his neck and face. His eyes bulged and then popped, leaking fluids down his cheeks. The rest of his skin burned off, revealing the festering flesh beneath. Before that too was burned to ash, and a grimacing skull stared out from the flames, glowing embers shining from sockets instead of eyes. As I watched, the flayed, ravaged figure in the painting looked at me, his head jerking and lolling on his shoulders, searching blindly until he met my gaze with those infernal eyes. I screamed as his skeletal jaw contorted into a terrifying smile. His eyes flashed, and tortured laughter echoed through my head. I clutched at my ears, trying to smother the noise, but it continued to grow in loudness and intensity. I screamed in response, a heavy guttural sound that was more animal than man, but it accomplished little more than tearing my throat. I curled into a ball, my forehead pressed against the cold stone of the floor, and I rocked back and forth as the incessant laughter chipped away at my sanity. My screams attenuated until they became silent, the muscles and tendons in my neck stretching taut and rigid as the force of my terror erupted, unchecked, from the tattered remains of my throat. The world vanished into that cyclone of noise and pain. There was no past, no present, there was no longer a future that I could see. Everything, all of it, had been subsumed into that burning, profane effigy of Christ. I think that's when I broke. I simply gave up, offered myself up to an eternity of fire and pain and roaring noise. What other choice did I have?
Follow me, sir.
The voice was no more than a whisper, but it cut through the maelstrom that raged in the church. The noise was still there, a dense pressure pushing against the brief moment of respite the unexpected voice had given me. I glanced around uncertainly. The voice had seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was simply there, inside my head. It took a moment for me to readjust to the world. The shifting fabric of reality had stilled for a moment, not settled on one thing or another, but a strange, surreal combination of the two. The past and the future married together in a patchwork of mismatching images.
Here, sir. Over here. The wicked one can't get you in the confessional.
There was a flash of movement across the pews, accompanied by the bright, clear laughter of a child and the closing of a door further into the church. Could I trust the voice? I didn't know. But the brief respite from the noise-induced hellscape was enough to sway me to that side, even if only temporarily. I forced myself to my feet, stumbling as the world swayed, and plodded unsteadily down the nave, towards where the confessionals were clustered in the transept to the right. I stopped at the first one, my hand on the door, and looked back across the expanse of the church. I am alone. The thought sounded more like wishful thinking than reassurance as I turned my back on the church and gripped the handle to the wooden booth. I hesitated again, a jolt of electricity travelling up my spine and paralysing me for an instant. Footsteps. Somewhere behind me, back up the nave, towards the entrance that was no longer an entrance. They echoed on the flagstones in that heavy way that is reserved for places of worship and graveyards. Closer, closer, closer. As they approached the corner of the transept, I forced myself to move and slipped inside the confessional, closing the door softly behind me, and sank to the ground inside. I crouched there shivering, the taste of bile and vomit still sharp in my mouth, as I waited for whoever, or whatever, it was to pass.
Don't worry, mister. The wicked one doesn't come in here.
My back slammed against the edge of the narrow bench as I flinched backwards away from the voice.
No. They doesn't come in here. Offends the senses, they say. Something about the stench of redemption being too strong. So this is where I come. This is where I come when I do not want them to find me.
The voice was unmistakably a child's, high in pitch, with an edge of disturbing playfulness that didn't belong in that accursed place. I glanced up at the window in the partition, straining my eyes in the dark, but I couldn't make out anything on the other side.
This is where I used to hide when they came for me. If I was fast enough, that was. Terrible, terrible things they did to me, they did. Stripped the flesh right from my bones, they did. Peeled me like an apple, even left me hanging from an apple tree outside. It didn't even it didn't even hurt all that much in the end, it didn't. They did worse things to me. Did you know there are worse things than being skinned alive? Because I didn't. Not until after the flesh was stripped from my bones. There are things that leave their mark on your soul. Things that you can never wash away.
As the voice spoke, I began to shudder uncontrollably. The child's voice delivered the gruesome descriptions in a voice more suitable for singing nursery rhymes in the playground, and that disturbed me more than the echoing footsteps outside.
Have you ever been flayed, mister? I reckon you quite like it. It's not at all as bad as some of the things the Wicked One will do to you if he catches you. I bet you'd beg me to slice that skin from your bones if you ever got caught. What do you think?
Whatever was on the other side of the partition slammed themselves against the window, and a bloodshot eye, framed by bare muscle and sinew, pressed into the tattered grille that separated the two sides of the booth. The eyes bulged sickeningly in their sockets, bloodshot orbs that darted feverishly from side to side. I scrambled frantically at the floor of the confessional. Child's voice or not, the look in those eyes was not human. My fingers caught on the latch, and I spilled out of the confessional, striking my head against the cold stone as I lost my balance. The already disjointed world spun around as I clambered backwards and sat against the side of the booth. My stomach heaved again, and the scant remains of my stomach spilled out onto my shirt.
Oh, that's embarrassing. Look at you, mister, making a mess of your shirt like that. I've been given 20 lashes for less. You had better hope the Wicked One doesn't find you looking like that.
I looked up in the direction of the voice, and for the first time really saw the thing that made it. It, whatever it was, or at least had been a young boy. No more than 10, if I had to take a guess from its height. The boy was wearing his altar robes, although what must have once been pristine white fabric were now marred by dark splotches of blood, both fresh and congealed. Its face, as I had seen in the confessional window, was bare of skin, muscles, sinew, bone, and cartilage raw and exposed. Drops of blood seeped through the ruined flesh like condensation and pattered to the ground as it shook its head slowly. It raised an arm and waved a finger at me in admonishment, and I could see that its hands too were flayed, bones and sinew visibly flexing as he waved a digit from side to side.
Maybe it's all the time I spent in that stinking boot today. But I'm feeling generous, mister. I reckon I can help you out here. Make it quick and easy. A lot quicker than anything he'll do to you anyway. Not painless though. We all have to pay our dues, mister. But don't worry, it stops hurting after a while.
I watched in horror as the thing that had once been a boy shuffled slowly towards me, its stumbling gait and crooked shoulders hinting at further abuse and punishment. I tried to back away, but only succeeded in pressing against the wall of the booth. The ghoul in front of me, as I'm not sure what else to call it, grinned at my futile efforts. Its bare lips peeled back over its teeth, and an unnatural fire glowed in its eyes. It held up a hand, and the grin turned into a sneer as it pinched two fingers together and made a rapid pulling motion. It took a moment for it to register, but a searing pain erupted along my forearm. I looked down, still in shock, to see blood blossoming on the sleeve of my shirt, steadily spreading through the fabric. When the second wave of pain hit me, my exhalation was hard enough to feel like my ribcage was going to collapse. I slumped back against the wooden panelling and struggled to inhale the lost breath. That second jolt cleared my mind just enough that I thought to pull up the sleeve to inspect the damage. I already had a feeling that I knew what I would find, but I felt the panic welling up in me as I saw the narrow strip of skin missing from my forearm. The thing that had once been a boy laughed again and repeated the motion with its fingers. This time, the pain erupted across my back, bridging my shoulder blades and stinging from the cold sweat that saturated my shirt. I arched backwards, my legs kicking out frantically at the flagstones as I slammed my head into the wood wall behind me, desperate to distract myself from the agony burning across the center of my back. My vision turned white as the boy repeated the gesture over and over. White fire surged along my legs, chest, and shoulders as that monster peeled strips of flesh from my body with each flourish of its fingers. I tried to scream, but my lungs couldn't contain enough breath. I tried to stand, but the pain exploded each time I moved, and I could do little more than flop back to the ground. I am ashamed to admit that it didn't take me long to wish that what the boy had said was true, that the pain would stop. But each new wound, each new piece of flesh torn from my body, intensified the pain 100-fold, building to a crescendo that never came. The laughter that bubbled out from the bloody lips of my assailant grew with each gesture. The child's laughter had become a manic cackle that echoed erratically around the interior of the church. That infernal sound bombarded my ears before breaking through and rattling around in my skull. I brought my hands to my ears to try and block the noise, but my hands were balls of fire where ravaged skin touched ravaged skin. I knew I was going to die. It's funny, really. I've never been reckless with my life. I think, overall, that given my line of work, I've been pretty responsible. But in that moment, all I wished for was death. Not escape, not rescue, not even for the torture to stop. Just death. That was the only thing that could free me from the nightmare I was trapped in. Then, just as my mind broke and my body reached its breaking point, everything stopped. The following silence seemed louder than the manic cackling and sound of my flesh being ripped from my body. I tried to look up, but my head and neck refused to obey. All I could manage was a weak glance up from under hooded brows, bloodied spit and phlegm unapologetically dribbling from my mouth, attempting to steal a glance at what was happening. The boy was suspended in the air, held by the scruff of the neck by a tall figure in dark robes, face and neck hidden by a heavy hood. The ghoul thrashed about, reaching back in an effort to scratch at the newcomer's face and arms, but the person, who I could only assume was the one who the boy called the Wicked One, was oblivious to the attacks. It shook its head, and then casually tossed the boy into the pews. The Wicked One turned back to me, its unseen eyes piercing me from behind the shadows of its hood. They shook their heads slowly, a motion that expressed both disappointment and weary resignation. That one was always a failure. The voice boomed in my mind, a deep, measured tone that echoed a childhood of Sunday services. Corrupt and unclean, his motives were ever his own, never pure. I should have burned him. The Wicked One, there was no doubt in my mind now, looked down on me from the shadow of their hood, red eyes glinting savagely. Pain wasn't the goal. It was simply the process. Do you know how much blood it takes to wash away original sin? To truly purge that stain from someone's soul? It cannot be done with a splash of water or a few drops of chrism. The greatest lie ever told was that we could find absolution from our sins, that the filth that is our birthright could be cleansed. That boy and the others who came before him are testament to this. They were born wicked, they lived wicked, and they died wicked. No amount of blood, pain, or suffering could ever alter that. For every drop of blood or tortured scream I extracted from them, they repaid me tenfold with the misery their blasphemies exerted on my soul. The more I pushed them towards the light, the longer a shadow they cast upon this holy place. I raged, I beat, I flayed, I desecrated. I tarnished my own soul in my efforts to purge them of the evil that infested theirs. Before I was done with them, the chalice did not want for their blood. The ciborium was glutted with their desiccated flesh. Their decaying offal adorned the altar like flowers, and the Eucharistic candles burned with the stench of their fat. My assailant bent closer, the darkness of his hood now hovering inches from my face. Do you know how much blood it takes to desecrate holy ground? To defile a place so thoroughly that not only does the church disown all association, but actively chooses to ignore its existence? It is certainly more than most would countenance, but not as much as one might apprehend. Its mouth drew close to my face, still hidden in shadow, but rendered visible by the stench of rotten meat and curdled blood. It smiled. I don't know how I knew, but it did, even if I couldn't see it. A wide, unnatural smile that split its face in half and threatened to consume me whole. My body burned and throbbed where the flesh had been stripped. I could feel the blood welling in my wounds, dripping slowly to the cold floor below. My vision swam, distorting the already incoherent world and churning the vertigo in my gut into a curdled mass of nausea and bile. Somehow, through the pounding of blood in my temples, and the high-pitched ringing in my ears, I heard something growling off to the side. I tried to turn towards the sound, but my head flopped weakly on my neck, my chin refusing to rise from where it rested awkwardly against my collarbone. The Wicked One leaned in closer, searing breath hot against my face. I wanted to turn away, as if not looking at whoever or whatever had cornered me would ease the terror of what I knew came next. But I was transfixed by that shadowy gaze. A pew screeched against the tiles, and the hooded face turned from mine. I saw a flurry of movement in my peripheral vision, and a shadow crashed into the Wicked One, pushing them away from me. They screamed in anger and clawed at the boy clinging to their back. The two of them tumbled away from me, and I slumped backwards. I tried to rise and run, but my legs buckled under me, and I crashed awkwardly back to the floor, my knees twisting painfully under me. Liar, 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 liar. The child's frantic screams almost drowned out the noise of the struggle. The priest roared in anger at the accusations and crashed backwards into the pews as he attempted to dislodge their assailant, but the boy held on, digging his scarred, flayed fingers into the man's shoulders, dark blood staining his fingers as they pierced through robes and skin.
I was a good boy. I said my prayers. I did my penance. You did this to me.
The priest roared as he rose back to his feet, the action seeming to defy gravity as he planted his feet on the ground and simply rose, his back straight and rigid, his hand still clutching at the crazed child. The man reached backwards, his arms and shoulders rotating unnaturally as he grabbed the boy under the armpits and tore him from his back. The priest held the small figure aloft in front of him, putting him on full display for me. His laugh filled the room, full of scorn and hate. You were conceived in sin and destined to live in sin. A miserable wretch, undeserving of the charity I proffered you. I tainted my own soul to cleanse you, and this is how you repay me? The Wicked One's voice trembled in anger as he spoke, and as I watched, he began to squeeze the boy. The child's eyes bulged as the priest compressed his chest in an iron grip. I could hear the bones of his chest creaking, straining against the inhuman strength of the man's arms. The scream that erupted from the child was unlike anything I had ever heard. It pierced my mind like a hot knife, slicing through my ears and burying its savage echo in my brain. The boy twisted, his head rotating on his neck, bones cracking and tendons popping as he turned to face the priest. Lunging forward, he buried his teeth in the priest's neck in a barbaric grip. The Wicked One's hood fell back as he stumbled, and for the first time, I caught sight of the gaunt, emaciated face, more of a skull than human, pale white and mottled with purulent black sores. The boy was latched onto his atrophied neck and worried at the leathery flesh, dark blood seeping from the wound like tar. I was transfixed by the sight of the two dead creatures locked in a death embrace before me. Even as the child struggled to rip the man's throat out, the priest continued to crush his chest, bones cracking as they finally gave way. The world shuddered as I watched, flashing rapidly between the old church and the ruin I had entered God knows how long ago. The two malignant phantoms flickering in and out of existence. I forced myself to turn, directing my gaze back towards the entrance. As the world shifted between the past and the present, I saw the door reappear, a small shaft of light infiltrating the darkness. Engaged as they were, in the throes of their mutually afflicted torment, I had to take my chance. I pushed myself to my feet, battling the waves of nausea and vertigo. I almost fell as the bones in my ruined knee grated against each other, sending waves of pain surging along my thighs. I lurched between the pews as the world deformed around me, stretching and compressing itself as the conflicting realities clashed. I crashed into the door, almost slamming it shut again, and jammed my fingers painfully into the gap to prevent its closure. The bones in my hands fractured as the heavy wood pressed into them, and I screamed. Behind me, silence filled the cavernous church. I dared not look back. I roared again, forcing the door open, even as the pain sent black motes spiraling across my vision, and stumbled through the gap into the waiting twilight. You've seen my scars. Not the other ones, the ones you can't see. the stains that now exist on my soul. But the scars where whatever it is that haunts that church skinned me, the spots where they tore strips of skin from bone, where they peeled me like an apple. You have seen them, and you know that they are real. But I'm here, aren't I? I guess that's something, isn't it? I'm here, and I have the story. My story. The stuff of dreams it is. There's no way this one isn't going viral. Soon, everyone will know. And everyone with a camera, a lavalier mic, and a decent internet connection will be wanting in on a piece of the action. But I was the first, and when all this is done, I will be the last, just as he was. Welcome, folks, to episode 34 of Tales Under a Broken Sky. I am your host, Keith, and I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. I'm back. After a longer than planned absence due to some work, family, and writing commitments, I finally got this show back on the road. I know that I planned to get this podcast back out in September, but I had a looming deadline from my editor for my novel, and life just got crazy. That doesn't mean I wasn't writing. I already have 2 more stories lined up for the podcast, and I've been working on planning the long-form content as well, which I am really looking forward to getting back into. And that's where this story kind of picks up. Malevolency is one of those stories that came out of nowhere, an idea, bare bones, but with a tone and a feel and a setting. The rest, while I won't say it was a chore, did require some effort and grind to get into shape, ensuring that the story and the symbolism matched up, as well as reacquainting myself with some religious terminology that had been lost to the depths of time. This is a bit of a departure for me. I haven't really written anything that directly falls into the category of religious or cult horror, and it was an interesting departure to try and flex my literary muscles in a new direction. I like taking the time to blend the symbolism with horror elements, as well as delving a bit more into the gorier and body horror side of the genre. Most of my writing tends towards the psychological rather than the physical, so this was a very satisfying diversion from my usual work. Normally I might try to go over some of the symbolism, meaning and inspiration behind the story, but this time around, I like leaving the meaning looser to interpretation. I tried to build different layers into the story that might mean different things from different perspectives, so I'm going to be a bit of a tease this time around and leave that side of things up to you, the listener. I have a few stories drafted already, so I'm positive that I will be able to get back into my fortnightly posting schedule, although bear with me for the first episode or 2 while I navigate getting back into the routine of producing content on a very regular basis. I have been focused on editing my first novel heavily over the past few months, and I've gotten into a slower workflow as I was working on tightening and filling in gaps in my story. I am super excited to being one step closer to getting this story out into the world though, and the process itself of beginning the final road to sharing this one has been incredibly satisfying, even if imposter syndrome is rearing its ugly head again. On a side note, Tales Under a Broken Sky, Collected Tales Volume 1, is now available on Amazon, both in Kindle and print format. It collects the 11 original short stories from the first season of the podcast, alongside a little teaser chapter from an upcoming novella I am currently putting the finishing touches to. If you've been a fan of the podcast, I would love if you could pick up a copy. Being an author nowadays is a complicated and highly involved process, especially when you're in the indie space as I am. I'm responsible for all my own promotion, writing, editing, recording and production, and any support is always greatly appreciated. Right, self-promotion aside, I'm off to start work on the next episode. Until next time. Thank you for listening to episode 34 of Tales Under a Broken Sky. I hope you enjoyed this week's production as much as I enjoyed writing and recording it. If you did enjoy it, please consider liking and subscribing to the podcast on your platform of choice and sharing with your friends. This will really help the show and keep me motivated to produce more content. Tales Under a Broken Sky, Collected Tales Volume 1 is now available on Amazon, both for Kindle and in print. It collects the 11 original short stories from the first season of the podcast, and I am super excited to share my writing with you in this new format. As always, your continued support is greatly and eternally appreciated. Thank you again for your time.